Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lee Schwartz, and I'm the Director of Business Development here at SVA Certified Public Accountants. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, where we will be unveiling the results from our fourth annual already, Veterinary Salary and Benefit Survey. So our presenters have a lot of ground to cover today. I don't want to take up too much time, but before we get started, I just want to say a couple of words about SVA and our history working with veterinarians. Actually, I know a lot of the people who are on the webinar today have attended our past webinars. So let me just say this. We've been around for more than 50 years. And one of the main reasons we've made it this long is because of our consistent goal of remaining independent. And by helping veterinary practices with profitability, growth, and overall business strategy, we help position them to remain independent as well. Our mindset is that when you're a practice owner or shareholder, you have to work with someone who's more than just an accountant or tax preparer. You need someone who's a true advisor working collaboratively with you. Information like the information we're sharing today is just one example, one small way in which we do that. So just a couple of comments too about the information we're about to share. As you can imagine, the more practices that participate, the better the survey data is. So only those practices are going to receive the full results. If you didn't participate this year, well, number one, if you didn't participate this year, please participate next year. But if you didn't participate this year and you want the full results, reach out to me directly and we can discuss ways in which we can share it. If not, you can still go to our website and download the executive summary, which has more limited data. And as far as this webinar goes, if you have questions as we go through, please chat them in. We will cover them at the end if we have time. We got a lot of information to cover though. So let me introduce our speakers. We've got two of the most experienced people in our healthcare and veterinary practice to walk you through everything. We've got Andy Slinger and Nate Drykosen. And by now you probably recognize these two gentlemen. They're both partners here and have been very involved in growing our practice with veterinarians. They work with practice owners and practice managers on efficiency, tax, and profitability strategies. All right, so let's jump in. As I said, lots of ground to cover. Nate, you want to get us kicked off here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lee. So as you mentioned, we've got a ton of stuff to get through today. We are going to be ambitious and try and get through pretty much all of it. And of course, for those of you that did participate, you'll be able to reference the full report for some of the items that we may not get to as well. But we'll also have some little nuggets with this presentation that are not going to be necessarily in the full report. So first off, we want to cover some objectives in terms of what we aim to cover at a high level today. Looking at general market trends, of course, the survey data itself, but then also leave you with some tips and next steps in terms of, okay, how do we take this information and move it forward to further our veterinary organization? Some of the general market trends that we're hearing and were apparent from this survey, and these topics are not going to necessarily surprise anybody, but the growth of artificial intelligence, the use of some of those technologies in terms of how they're helping run practices on the daily has continued to grow, and the products have continued to get better. We've seen more and more folks choose to embrace some of those technologies or at least dabble in them, which is encouraging to see. It's been pretty clear that automation, artificial intelligence, and the ability to leverage technology is not going anywhere. And there are some real benefits to doing so, including helping staff workflows and managing for some of the market dynamics that are affecting availability of staff right now. So for some instances, some of those technologies can be viable solutions to help with some of those issues that practices are communicated they're experiencing. Another trend we've seen is the continued high demand for quality bookkeeping, as we'll see here in a minute. The practices that have internal bookkeepers, the cost of those folks, the wages of those folks are the fastest growing position within this survey. And beyond that, we're seeing more and more practices choosing to outsource or delegate their bookkeeping function to external parties, be that a CPA firm, some sort of bookkeeping provider. See a wide range there, but overall, the general trend is that is an area that is continuing to evolve and growing fast as things become more and more complex and time constraints become even more so apparent. We're continuing to see expanded benefits offerings, different types of benefits, the ask from employees for veterinary practices to offer competitive benefits similar to other industries, being everything from insurances to retirement plans, and some of those kind of fringe items that might be less common in other industries but are creative and help attract folks to the veterinary industry and keep them there. And the last item we're seeing is the movement to QuickBooks Online. And this has been an evolving process. But earlier this year, Intuit had announced that they were going to be discontinuing issuing new versions of their desktop product, which has been a mainstay not only in the veterinary industry, but many other industries as well. And instead, they've invested heavily in their online cloud-based product. We continue to see folks moving toward that as a viable solution from the desktop product, because the understanding is that while they are going to continue to support their 2024 product for some period of time, the understanding is that at some point that support is going to end and that product is going to kind of fade into non-existence and kind of go by the way of the dinosaurs. So for many folks, we're seeing QuickBooks Online as a fairly straightforward transition that'll maintain many of the functions and data they're looking for as they look to move into a more cloud-based accounting platform. Some market trends that we asked specifically about in the survey, looking at what are your top strategic goals in the next 1 to 3 years. And for those of you who have been longtime participants in our survey, you'll noted that the format of this survey changed a bit. We tried to be a little bit more all-encompassing and touch on some of these topics and have some fodder for conversation and thought as folks think about what might be next for their practice. So some of the big areas that really stood out, practice growth being the largest area. And of course, these were not necessarily exclusive answers. There could be more than one answer per practice. So as you look at some of the percentages, that probably makes sense. Looking at being more efficient operationally, looking at expanding different service offerings, certainly seeing the interest in, for example, some clinics going to offering like an orthopedic specialty, those sorts of things. So it's interesting to see that there is some percentage of folks thinking about that strategically. Continuing to attract DVMs and new team members, looking at possibly transitioning or succession planning to whatever the next step in the business cycle looks like as folks near the end of their careers or maybe the next step in their careers. Looking at reducing debt and kind of further stabilizing profit and loss balance sheets, looking for some stability and consistency financially, looking at selling the practice, and then a small amount with some various other strategic goals that none of which were significant enough to mention here. Are you currently planning or considering any of the following? So this is actually acting upon some of these strategies talked about in the previous slide. No surprise, looking at hiring another associate and attracting staff seriously being explored by many practices as we look to navigate the labor shortage and just overall shortage of talent, not only in the veterinary industry, but across the marketplace in general. We have anecdotally seen a little bit more stability in this regard, so that is encouraging to see compared to the last several years. Beyond that, looking at opening a new location, surprisingly close to 11%. We found that a bit surprising, but encouraging that folks, at least a healthy percentage of them, feel stable enough that they see a continued need for their services in slightly different geographies. And that is encouraging for the continued development of the veterinary industry as well. Looking at renovating or expanding facilities, no surprise that as folks get more and more busy, that they are looking to expand their capacity or look at their current facilities as they're aging and realizing that there's going to be some improvements to be made to continue to be viable and serve their client base for the next several years. Transitioning ownership, selling to a corporate group, for example, being quite a bit less. That has definitely been a trend that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. Really, as some of those larger corporate groups have settled on out of their growth phase, at least temporarily, based on market conditions and some of the heavy growth that they had for a period of time, and just realizing that they kind of need to stay the course themselves, and kind of get their own organizations right, seeing much less strategic acquisitions by those private equity groups and larger corporate groups. So looking at the most financial uncertainty, pretty evenly distributed across some of the larger categories. Staff compensation being the largest one, and of course we hope to touch on that and provide some insights today and with our report. Looking at rising overhead or inflation, so that's just the overall change in costs of not necessarily any direct expenses or expenses tied necessarily with producing revenue, but just the overall cost of things such as utilities and rent, facilities, equipment, those sorts of things that just kind of go hand in hand with running a practice and continuing to kind of keep the wheels churning forward. Retirement readiness, 14%, and then pricing of services, 17.5%. What is causing the most stress or frustration? Certainly healthy portions of this being staffing and hiring, no surprise there. Kind of a blur of smaller items like managing overhead, other and regulatory and compliance items. A lack of time, almost just under 23%. Lack of time to devote to leadership or strategy, and client and patient expectations being just under 18% as well. That lack of time for leadership and strategy is a one that really resounded with us, and something we devote quite a bit of time to with some frequency with our clients, because having some direction, touching base on goals, managing financial expectations and setting those goals can be key to continued progress and helping understanding numbers and being more confident in what the future could look like. So with that, we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts, and I'm going to kick it over to Andy to take us through to some of the position specifics and trends.
Thanks, Nate. Real quick, before we get away from the trends, what I find fascinating, when we meet with you, we always talk to you about people, process, and technology. And we know we've had a people challenge for years now. Process, I love the trend that I'm seeing so many practices work on their operational efficiency. That's great to see. And then 3, you're all in the same boat. Look at all the trends that are technology related, even making your bookkeeping process more efficient, whether it's outsourcing or internal. There's just such a demand on figuring out this technology, how to embrace it, how to implement it. So just know that you're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. As far as the data now, just starting out with a few quick takeaways. I'll give you some quick trends that we're seeing in the individual categories, but you're going to see steady at all levels in your CVTs and your assistants, not surprising. The question is, what comes next? Are we in a little bit of a plateau, a little bit of a slowdown? What's around the corner? Is there going to be more modest growth in wages and demand in the next year? We're going to see. It showed possibly a slight expectation of a slowdown. Benefits. I got to make sure to leave Nate enough time to talk about benefits because, quite frankly, they are just as important as wages, if not more important right now. Bonuses, we've talked a lot about them. I haven't talked about retention bonuses in some time, which I think is reflective in the data. A little bit of a pullback there. And then, again, your rising costs. The only way that you can offset that is by charging fairly and increasing your fees appropriately for the value you're providing your patients. So that was done for 2024, 2025, and in talking to many of you, it's going to be a trend that continues well into 2026. Okay, as you can see, takeaway here, we've got a wide array of practices from all over the state of Wisconsin, so it's wonderful to see. As far as some very quick demographics, if you just look at this, you carve out the very small, you carve out the very large, you have over 75% in that really mid-range size practice. So you get a great range of information here to compare. Mirrors pretty much the same. And, we talk a lot about KPIs, but you could very quickly take this information and figure out, okay, how many DVMs are in each of these practices to be generating that kind of revenue. Client type, for the most part, we still have the brick and mortar practice, overwhelming majority. You have some of you that are still, making the host calls, and then, we still see those attempting the mobile practice setup. As far as specialty, still, over two-thirds of you who responded are in the tried and true small animal category. We still see the about 23% in that mixed, and then we see a little bit of array in the other specialties. Okay, so just to be clear, in case you didn't participate, we carved it out into buckets of 0 to 3, 4 to 9, 10 or more as far as experience, number of years. And then basically the question was, what is the average hourly rate for this position in each of those categories? That's how we teed it up. All right, so the response in this category. So just to kind of give you the visual, obviously the highlighted center box is going to be your average. You're going to see the trend as you go by experience level. And then down below, you see the average in the dot in the middle, and then you can kind of see the range. So you can kind of get a sense if there's any outliers. And here, for example, you can see the maximum that it took at least one practice to onboard a new receptionist or client service really stretched above that average. But otherwise, you can see that average, anywhere from $17, up to $21. And there was some variability here, a little bit of a demand of about 4% increase to get people in the door, a little more of a level 2% middle, and then another 4% increase on the top range compared to a year ago. Okay, bookkeepers. So we got all kinds of information for this particular question, and I think it's reflective in what Nate touched on. It's reflective in how challenging it is to just find a capable, trusted individual to handle your bookkeeping. So we decided to just make it into all experience levels into one slide. And what I can show you here, you can see number one, the average $31. You can see the wide range, 14, which is probably an outlier, all the way up to 60, which may be an outlier as well. But you can see that strong average 31. A year ago, that was about $28. Okay, that's almost a 13% increase to pay for a bookkeeper. There is a tremendous demand for that. And the question, of course, on the next slide is, who do you have doing your bookkeeping? And as Nate said, first of all, many practices, more than ever, are opting to just say, hey, bookkeeping service, CPA firm, outsource, just handle it. I've gone through so many people in the last 5 years. I've tried to do it myself. I need someone who's been around and is going to be around that I trust. And it may seem, yeah, we are a CPA firm putting this on. So you may say, oh, that's a self-serving comment. It's not. It's just reality. Okay, we get calls all the time. I just talked to somebody a week ago who said, hey, it's time. I need you to just handle our back office function because of something that happened. It's a trend. If you look at this is fascinating to me. 31% of you owners are still doing your bookkeeping. That's either taking clinic time or that's taking personal time. And neither one of them is ideal. Some of you do enjoy it because you say it helps you know your numbers. But again, a third of you are still doing it yourself. Now, up to 22% are just saying, hey, someone outside of my practice is doing this. And then still, about half, it's still falling on somebody internal, either someone who is just doing bookkeeping or it falls on the practice or business manager to do that. But it's a very, very big challenge for all of you, probably just as big as finding that next associate to bring into your practice. Okay. Now the manager and administrator. And, again, you can see the trend, anywhere from 28 up to $31. And here, Big challenge to get people in the door. So there's about 11.4% increase in the 0.0 to 3 bucket compared to a year ago. A little more of a plateau in the 4 to 9 year range of about 3 to 4%. But again, it's the challenge of replacing that person who exited, and you got to get someone new, capable, trusted in the door. CVTs, this is where I mentioned. You can see the increase, anywhere from 20 to 26. But if you look at it compared to a year ago, very consistent among the experience levels, ranging anywhere from 5.5% up to about 7.5%. So strong, steady wage growth for your CVTs. And the same thing is for your veterinary assistants. You can see again, 17 to 20 on average. And here the range was anywhere from about 5.5% to 8.5% across the experience levels, 0 to 3, 4 to 9, and 10 plus. So very consistent increases and demand there as well. Non-owner DBMs. I know a lot of you would say, I just want to get them in the door. I'm not worried about how much I got to pay them, right? There's definitely that shortage. So here, as you can imagine, based on the different methods of compensation, we got some interesting data. But what we could drill down into, you can definitely see the averages that show some consistency between the different levels. Obviously, you look at that maximum of 10 plus years, 188. Again, that's either just a unique situation or that's a pro sale setup or someone including the bonus in what was reported. But again, trend there, it's the continued demand, especially in the rural areas. And then, of course, the increase in needing to compensate them accordingly. All right. I think with that, Nate, I promised leave you time for benefits. Here you go.
You did. I appreciate it. So one thing you'll see that's pretty consistent with a lot of these graphics and percentages is, as we mentioned in the beginning, a pretty robust build out and growth in these areas. Many folks now are offering health insurance, dental insurance, some of the different disabilities, and then also getting a little bit creative with those health offerings, possibly tacking on some FSAs, FSAs, HSAs, and with those FSAs is also going to be included some dependent care benefits. Educational assistance has always been something very prevalent in the veterinary industry as well. And within the other category that is larger maybe than other years, some of the things we saw included in that were vision insurance, specific time off benefits, pet care benefits, paid dues, the ability to bring pets to work, and then also some other health reimbursement type accounts that would be kind of beyond or separate from flex spending and health savings accounts. So certainly some interesting trends there. Looking specifically at the retirement plans, now more than ever, more and more folks going to a 401k offering, and often with that some sort of profit sharing or and sometimes in rare cases a cash balance plan add-on. So really continuing to see the veterinary industry match the trends in other industries as well, where folks are looking for more and more for some stable retirement vehicles to help defer to. And quite honestly, the compliance environment has never been more favorable to do so. Looking at some sign-on bonuses across the spectrum, right now, as Andy mentioned, not a whole lot of traction with retention bonuses. We are still seeing some fairly consistent sign-on bonus numbers with roughly 23% offering some sort of sign-on bonuses. And you can see the range and averages there for positions. No surprise to anyone, the DVMs are on the higher side, assistants slightly lower than techs, and techs kind of a wide range there, but also trending toward the higher end as well. Overall wage increase comments. So really ranged pretty widely, looking at anywhere from 0 to 13%, but the average being right around 3.77%. Last year, the range was anywhere from about 0.5% to 8%, with an average of 3.12%. So pretty much no matter how you slice it, those numbers are trending up this year compared to last year across all categories. We mentioned briefly the retention program. just under 20% offer some sort of program like that. And these are called various things. These are called stay bonuses. Some people might call this holiday bonuses. Some might call this discretionary bonuses. But really, you can see that across the different position types, this most commonly affects things like assistants, techs, and receptionists, folks that tend to be a little bit more hourly based. Looking at fee increases, no surprise to anybody, most folks are looking at and have increased patient fees this year. As you're looking to right size your employment costs, this is something you absolutely should be doing, because that's really where you can help cover the costs associated with the more robust offerings required to stay competitive in the employment space. Within those fee increases, we dove in a bit as to a little bit more surgically where those occurred. And we've got these broken down by category, from anything from pharmacy to lab to imaging, surgery, dentistry, and on down the line. And what you'll see with that infographic is, for the most part, especially for the very consistent and higher value items, ranging anywhere from 5 to 7%. So certainly encouraging to see as folks have some grasp of their numbers and the need to continually revisit those fees. So what does all of this mean? What should you take away from this, and what are next steps? As we said, we saw this increasing trend in investing in technology and automation. There can be really useful tools there to help alleviate some of that staff load. Everything from dictation software to even simple chat GTP to help crafting messages and building templates into your practice softwares can help be a little bit more efficient and take some of that workflow away from your staff that have other things to do. Of course, as continued benefits costs continue to rise, that means continually revisiting your fees and making sure those are in line and helping you cover those costs. Consider externalizing bookkeeping so that you can utilize staff internally for other operational functions. It's a huge task. It tends to take folks quite a bit of time, and it's not the right fit for all practices to have a bookkeeper internally, or to take time up from their practice manager or their owners to be able to do that function. So in many cases, that might make sense. Educational assistance programs, which have been always very strong in the veterinary industry. There were some compliance items that were set to expire with 2025. With the tax bill that passed this summer, many of those were extended indefinitely. So if you've not explored that, now would be a great time to talk with your advisor regarding those items and how that could fit into your practice. And also with the bill that passed this summer, that brought around some future payroll complexities. The big takeaway there is that payroll reporting is only going to get more complex. And for those of you that are using QuickBooks Online payroll or trying to handle all of it internally or with some other platform, now might be the time to try and take that off of your staff's plate and put that with a third-party provider as well. Companies such as Paychex and ADP, QuickBooks Online, Intuit Assisted Payroll, and there's several others as well. But all of those offerings have their pros and cons, and have ways that they can help in different ways. With that, Lee, I think we've got maybe just a couple minutes for questions and final wrap up.
Yeah, just a couple. So much information, you guys, and we didn't even talk about the geographic information, right? Because that is broken down in the report by, what is it, South Central, Southeast, Northeast, and sort of other. So know that there's more information there, but there's only so much ground we could cover today. We've got a couple minutes left. If people have specific questions, please chat those in while we're waiting. And if we get any, guys, I guess I would just ask you, like, I know oftentimes when I talk to people, they're sort of most interested in that hourly wage data. If you are a practice and you're looking at that information, how would you use that to help you in your practice? Is this just hey, it gives me a sense that we're paying about the right amount, or do you go through that position by position? Like if you guys were practice owners or when you're working with your clients, how do you suggest they use that data?
Yeah, I can start with that one. I would certainly approach this as it is a data point, and caveat it with there are certainly some noted differences in geography that you'll see with the full report. But it is a great place to start. Also keep in mind that within some of those roles, some of the variability you see is based on the job description of what those folks are being asked to do. So as you look to right size this with your organization, think about, for example, if you're a client service representative, if you're also having them manage other people, if they're also helping with some of the bill payment functions, if they're also helping with inventory management, for example, or maybe that's something your practice manager is helping with. Under any of those circumstances, that's certainly something you'll want to factor into the compensation. And if you have those discussions with your team, you'll want to keep in mind some of the things that they might be doing in other areas or cross-train in other areas to help move the organization and keep the daily flow going.
I would just add one quick point to that. A lot of times the focus when you get a survey like this is just what it's costing to get a new individual in the door. Don't forget, there have been years we presented this where it's very interesting to see that a lot of times those more experienced people are not getting an increase. And so you're in that conundrum where you're having to hire somebody at potentially more than you already have a 3, 4, 5 year individual there. So just make sure that when you're considering your staff, that you're making sure that you're making appropriate increases across the board to be in market demand.
Yeah, and I hear you guys have mentioned, I've heard you mention as well in the past, like if you've got people on the lower end of that scale and they're high performers, um, it's probably in your best interest to bring them up as opposed to have them leave, go somewhere else, and then have to hire somebody who might not be a high performer at that higher rate anyway. So being proactive about that is important. I'm sure there are lots of other takeaways, guys. We are already a minute over. There was a ton of information that you guys went over. As we wrap up, I just want to point out you all can head to sva.com/vet series to see recordings of past vet specific webinars. We're also putting together some informational videos specific to issues facing veterinarians. So be on the lookout for those in the coming weeks. And we have a page set up for what you need to know about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and how it'll affect you. So that's sva.com/OBBA, OBBBA. We are right in the middle of tax planning season, and OBBA changed a lot of things for business owners. So if you don't have a strategic advisor helping you with tax planning right now, let's talk and see if we can help. And just a reminder, if you participated in the survey, you should have already received the 25-page report. If you didn't and you want to receive the full thing, please reach out to me and we can discuss how to get that to you. If not, a briefer version is available on our website. As always, this is a super exciting project for us. A lot of effort goes in. I want to thank Nate and Andy for everything that you guys do with this. I know it's super, super helpful to veterinarians in the state. So thank you guys. And we'll look forward to our 5th annual one next year. So thanks everybody for attending today and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.